Port has a centuries-old legacy intertwined with tradition, craftsmanship, and culture. When you think about your journey with tailors and the role that it plays in the world today, what is something you wish more people understood about Port?
Well, I think people tend to take this sort of rather historic view of Port, thinking, that it's a sort of drink for old men in sort of clubs in London, that sort of thing. And of course, it's a very long way from the truth. I think that people don't fully understand what it is. They sometimes confuse it with a spirit, and of course it's a wine. But I think for me, the thing that perhaps matters most is really for people to see the sort of beauty of the Douro Valley and where we make this. And we've got one of the most remarkable wine regions in the world. It's a UNESCO World Heritage Site. Here in Porto is also a UNESCO World Heritage Site. So that talks to the sort of timeless beauty of the Port region. And I think it's also a reason, for example, why tourism is becoming so much more important, and so much more important to us as a business, because people can come here, see it, and fall in love with the place, and then of course take a glass to a port here, and then whenever they drink it elsewhere in the world in the future, they will bring back those memories of this lovely time in this part of northern Portugal.
So we're here in Vila Nova de Gaia, just across the river from Porto, where all of the great port houses have names emblazoned across the buildings here. Taylor's, Graham's, Croft, Sandeman, Wars. It's hard not to notice that those names have a certain Britishness to them. So can you perhaps talk through why that is?
Well, Britain and Portugal have had a long history. I mean, we are the oldest alliance in the world. 2 years ago, so in 2023, we celebrated the 650th anniversary of that alliance. And so, and there's reasons for that. There's historically good reasons why, because obviously Portugal on the edge of Europe with some of the best ports. I don't mean they're the drink, I mean the sort of place that a ship would go into, like Lisbon, make it, there's some of the best ports on the eastern side of the Atlantic. And so for a seafaring nation like Britain, that has always been important to have that alliance in order to be able to sort of bring the British Navy into safety, as it were. But we're trading nations as well. And, from here today, one of the reasons it's so easy for us to export our port up to Britain is because so many ships come up the side of the Eastern Atlantic and stop in, pick up a container of port and deliver it on to Britain. So that relationship has been very strong. Now, there have been moments in history that have strengthened it further. And most people always point to a treaty that took place in the early part of the 18th century, in 1703. And that really allowed the British merchants to create effectively their own laws and taxes. And as a result of that, we were able to sort of trade more freely with less tax on our wines than, for example, France. And of course, Britain and France have sometimes gone to war, which disrupts the supply of the wine-producing country right next door to Britain. And so Portuguese wine did very well. And I think people fell in love with Port became incredibly popular. And it still remains very popular, but probably not quite at the level of consumption that one saw in previous centuries where people might, have a pint of port. Do that a little less often now.
You need to change the size and shape of the glass that it's served in to encourage that kind of consumption, I guess.
Yes, I think there was a tendency about century and a half ago where a lot of glasses got very small for all wines, and in many wine categories that the glass has grown again, but in port it still sort of needs to do so. I think that the ideal size for a glass of port is a sort of white wine glass, nothing too small. And part of the reason for that is that you need to a lot of the enjoyment is in the aromas. You need to be able to sort of swirl it in the glass. And enjoy those aromas.
And those little
thimbles filled right to the top. You miss all of it.
So, Britain, obviously historically a big port market. How does that look today? And where do other nations and markets sit in terms of consumption of port?
Well, port is quite an aspirational drink, and as through the process of globalization, as consumers around the world have become wealthier and looked towards some of those more aspirational activities, look towards brands and different lifestyle choices, port's become very important. So here at Taylor's, we are exporting now to about 103 countries around the world. And that would have been probably double where we were 30 years ago. So there's been a big change in the last generation. Britain is still very, very important. North America, Canada, these are big and important markets. Portugal itself is, of course, an important market, mostly driven by tourism. We saw in the COVID that consumption of port in Portugal fell by about 50%, which tells you how much tourists are drinking compared to the inhabitants. So it's popular, it's growing, but where it's really growing is at the top end. It's in the quality ports rather than in the volume ports. And again, that's very similar to you're seeing in many wine regions around the world where people, essentially are drinking less but drinking better quality.
So who's drinking the most port at the moment? Which nation, market?
Well, when you look at per capita consumption, obviously you point out sort of anomalies like the Vatican, which tends to sit quite high. But Britain is still very important in as a market. The biggest volume market remains France. So France consumes about twice the amount of port that Britain does, but most of that is at that sort of lower end. And in a way, port in France functions a little bit like cream sherry does in Britain. So if you kind of think about how the sort of cream sherry market is, as a sort of single glass, as a sort of an aperitif for a certain part of the community, rather than the sort of broader appeal of port. Typically as an after dinner or an end of the meal drink, but in many cases now people have it instead of a dessert. It seems to be an option people have.
And how is the market looking in general? Is it growing?
I think for what we've seen in the last sort of 20 years has been consistent growth in the quality end. So that's in the sort of late bottle vintages, the aged Tawnies. Those have continued to grow. We've continued to innovate. We brought out sort of older ports, which historically we probably used to keep back here or just use for blending. And now we are selling some of those 50-year-olds, 80-year-olds, and even some that have even crept over 100 years of age that have been sort of resting in cellars like this, and we've now brought to market. Because the consumer is kind of looking for that, and because they've got or prepared to spend the money, if you like, to be able to enjoy those sorts of ports. So look, I think what we will continue to see that. We'll continue to see that globalization. You'll continue to see the growth at the top end. I think the commodity end of port remains under pressure. I think that consumption in France will continue to decline, and that will lead to further pressures of restructuring within the industry, which has also been taking place in the last 30 years. So, as we sit at Taylor's, I think we're pretty optimistic about the future, but I'm certainly aware of other industry players for whom they're quite concerned about the drop-off in the cheap end of the port market.
I suppose part of the challenge is trying to attract younger drinkers as older drinkers get older. And so what does port do about that, especially given, as you mentioned, a certain stigma that's attached to it with older drinkers?
Yeah, I think we've done a lot of innovation. I myself was responsible for creating Rosé Port a while ago now, back in 2008. We brought it to market through our brand Croft rather than through Taylor's, but that was very much aimed at more of an aperitif market. It was certainly, we launched it as port without rules, so we didn't want people to feel that they had to treat it in a certain particular way, and they were free to consume it over ice or
mix long, perhaps.
Mix it long with tonic water. We've done quite a bit of that ourselves and brought that to market. In fact, a couple of years ago, we launched port in a can with a premix with port and tonic, both the white port and tonic and indeed the rosé. And again, that looked to a different market, more an aperitif market, but also a convenience packaging, a very different approach. We've also innovated at the top end, and whilst clearly being able to buy something that's maybe 2,000 or 3,000 euros for a bottle might mean people a little bit older. We've certainly seen success in selling those to younger professional successful business people or bankers or whatever who have that disposable income. But I think we when we look at it, we're not really trying to sort of capture the sort of 18, 20-year-old. I mean, it's a very crowded market from alcohol companies trying to sort of grab those, and the spirits people do a lot of that. I think we recognize that because port is quite aspirational, and there is a certain degree of ceremony around it, that our typical consumer sort of might come to us later in their 20s when they're looking to perhaps have their first dinner party, invite their friends round, and want to do it properly.
Sure.
And a glass of port with some cheese or whatever seems a very dignified and sort of grown-up way, if you like, to entertain. And I say it in those terms because I think that there is still a reverence about it, and we don't necessarily want to lose that. But I think also that you've got to give people a chance to understand a little bit more about their wine knowledge, to kind of therefore understand a little bit more about fortified wine as opposed to unfortified wines and so on, all the different styles of wine that exist around the world.
Yeah, it strikes me that there's a fine balance here, because on the one hand, port is so rooted in tradition. These are very old companies, and you are a custodian of that tradition. And so innovation needs to be dealt with a light hand, because these rituals that we have around drinking port with chocolate or with cheese after a meal could be challenged or disrupted if all of a sudden you're promoting, well, look, you should be drinking all your port in cocktails, as an aperitif.
Absolutely. I think we do need to tread carefully, but I think we also need to show people that port is incredibly versatile. Port tends to get thought of in a sort of single thing, port, and yet if you look at key sorts, I mean, we've got some of them we're going to probably taste during the course of our conversation, but something like late bottle vintage is a very different style of port to an aged Tawny, and that in turn is very different to something like a vintage port, which you might have that lots of people have these from the year that they were born, and of course they it's a very long-lived wine, so it's something that historically people put down for a child or a grandchild when they were born. It's something they would enjoy when they were 21, and continue to enjoy when they're 30 or 40 or 50. These wines last a very long time. So, there's lots of different styles of port, and there are ports for each occasion.
Yeah, that seems like the thing that needs to be celebrated and spoken about the most in a way, especially when, as you mentioned, you've got white ports and now rosé ports as well. I feel like there's been a big shift in the UK, the US, I guess some other markets too, towards low or no alcohol consumption. And certainly my experience in the UK bar scene is that we've seen a lot of non-alcoholic cocktails, but also lower ABV drinks that tend to incorporate vermouth or sherry, or other sort of fortified wine type bases instead of spirits.
Yeah.
Because you're effectively halving the ABV.
And that's where port fits in.
Yeah.
And lots of people are doing that. And I think port's naturally sweet. I mean, the process of making port, of course, is that we start with grapes that, if we didn't stop the fermentation halfway through with the addition of a grape spirit, and that raises the alcohol up to about 20%, kills off all the yeast cells because they don't live in alcoholic environments above about 15. So you get left with a lot of unfermented grape sugar, and of course that's why port is sweet. But that sweetness, that richness, that fullness, combined with, as you say, 20% alcohol, which is about half what you'd have in a vodka or whiskey or gin or something like that, makes it ideal for mixologists, because they're getting something that's got body, got natural sweetness, lower alcohol, and yet has enough alcohol to carry a drink. Similarly, if you're thinking what you have mixed with tonic water, when we look at the pink port, Rosé Port, things like the Croft Pink, which is mixed with tonic water, or Taylor's Chip Dry, which is our dry white port, mixed with tonic water, the ABV of that will be closer to 5. Whereas if you were having a gin and tonic or a vodka and tonic, that's going to be closer to 10 or 12. So it is a lighter alternative, despite being on its own, more alcoholic than a red wine.
Yeah, sure. And I mean, because of that residual sweetness, you could just mix with soda water.
Yeah.
You don't need to add tonic, which has got sugar in it, or any other mixer, sweetened mixer.
Correct. And we, when we made our, canning of white port and the pink port and tonic, we actually made our own tonic water and made it deliberately drier, because commercial tonics do tend to be sitting at about 33 grams per litre residual. And, we were making it down closer to 20, because you've already got some natural sweetness coming out of the port, as you say. And I think that, that is an important thing. And as you say, one way around that is to mix it just straightforward soda water.
Yeah. So you mentioned already the Douro Valley, and the fact that the grapes used to make port are all grown over there, which is about 50, 60 miles east from where we're sat right now. I mean, it's a
more
big
or
valley.
less, yeah, a little bit further. But
Yeah. Can you talk to me a little bit about the estates that tailors own, and really about how that winemaking process takes place? You mentioned about fermentation being cut short. I think it's important to emphasize that the port does not have sugar added to it. It's that process. But yeah, talk me through what the valley looks like, and the estates, and maybe a bit of a history as well. That's a big question.
Very big question. And of course, I think, it's important to really start with why there is this, 50, 60, 70 miles between where we're sitting on this on the Atlantic Ocean in the town of Porto, which after all has given its name to this wine, Porto wine. There's only 3 cities in the world that have given their name to wine. So you've got Porto, you've got Bordeaux, and then you've got Sherry or Jerez, or Jerez de la
Quiz
Frontera.
question, that one. I like that.
Yeah. So, so it's one of the few, but of course here we've got a very Mediterranean climate, so we never get too cold, although here in a port lodge, in the middle of winter, it can feel a little chilly, but it never gets too cold here. We see maybe we might get an hour of snow every decade. It's that sort of level. Whereas in the other side of the mountain range, which it only rises about 4,500 feet, but it essentially keeps this coastal climate, this Mediterranean climate. In the interior, we have a continental climate. That means we're going to have colder winters, hotter summers. So if we were up there now, we'd probably be in freezing conditions. But in the summer, we'll be up at sort of high 30s, 40 degrees. We probably normally would have a couple of weeks a year in August when we're over 40 degrees centigrade in the Douro Valley. So, and those extremes obviously are, very good for the vine. The vine is a very hardy plant. It's one of the vine will grow in places where most other crops won't grow. The only exception to that probably is the olive tree, and that's why you often see, regions that are very good at wine often make very good olive oil, as indeed we do in the Douro Valley. But so the vines have to really struggle hard to survive, and they're doing so in a rocky soil. It's called schistous. Schistous is a sedimentary rock. When I'm doing tastings, it's one of those words I like to get out before I've had too many glasses of port. But schist it's a sedimentary rock laid down millions of years ago in sort of bed of lake, and it's sort of built up as layers, and then through geological time has gone from the horizontal to the vertical. And that's hugely important, because when we plant our vines, the vines in those layers of rock, they'll push their roots down to get to water, and they'll need to push those roots down 20 or 30 feet to get to water.
It's a little bit like slate in that it's got that kind of layer.
Correct.
Yeah.
I mean, slate's a sedimentary rock. But slate's much harder. This you can actually, most times you can crumble it in your hands. You can break it up fairly easily, and indeed it has been used, broken up, and it makes these very flat edges, which is why you see in the Douro, hillsides that are sort of 45-degree slope, that are then made into these incredible terraces with these dry stone walls, where they build the wall, they break in the rock behind. So you end up with sort of broken earth or broken rock, and that's where we plant the vines. And you've got these dry stone walls and then another one. So it's like giant stairs that have been constructed all by mankind. It's all been done by hand. In the old days, all of that was hand and iron bars. Human muscle was what built that valley, and that, of course, was one of the reasons why it's a UNESCO World Heritage Site. Nowadays, of course, we use mechanical diggers and so on, but you don't really see the dry walls, stone walls being built anymore. It tends to be earth slopes, but you're sort of carving this extraordinary valley into an area where we can plant the vines. The vines will struggle to survive. The yield, the crop, tends to be quite small. So each vine probably can produce a maximum of about a bottle of port, and that's it. So it's very low production because it's a really fierce and harsh environment. It's still very remote. Not a lot of people live there because it is this very remote region. It's a region that's very dependent on wine and port. Although now, of course, tourism is opening up that valley and creating more employment, and that's really, I think, quite an exciting development for the Douro itself. And of course, right through the middle of the region, you have the River Douro, and that River Douro was vital to the development of the historic development of the region because it provided the transport link. So people, when our ancestors first were up, they bought our first vineyard in the Douro in 1744. So we were established here in this building. In fact, these lodges where we are date over 3 centuries. And they were here. They would have been buying port that was made by farmers in the Douro. And in 1744, they took the decision to go and buy their own property in order to control production and make sure they were getting quality. And in those days, what happened, they would go up there by, on a mule, take a week or so to get up there, and then of course you'd be able to buy those the grapes and make your port, and then you would transport the barrels down on the river. But you do so in the spring because in the summer, fierce heat, river tends to dry up and didn't make it very navigable. Spring floods, river was very navigable, and literally it would take you, say, a week or 10 days to get to the Douro and about 2 days to get back down on a boat in the sort of spring floods. But you asked me the question about how port's made, and as I say, I've described this sort of harsh environment. I've described these vines struggling, these very low yields. So you're getting grapes with a lot of intensity. We pick those all by hand. As you can imagine, these slopes are not conducive to any sort of mechanical type of picking. So picked by hand, carried down to the winery in baskets. We would still tread much of the production off our own vineyards. So we are literally emptying those baskets into a granite lagar. Now, a lagar is like a big stone tank. Imagine a tank that's about 10 foot by 10 foot, 10, 12 foot, something like that, filling up to sort of just below the knee, okay? It's not quite fashion, but it's just below the knee as well, where it tends to be 1 day's worth of picking, effectively. And the people who pick will then climb in there in the evening, and for the first 2 hours, they literally link arms, and they'll have somebody calling out the time as they march, and it's literally left, right, or in a bit of variety, 1, 2, 1, 2. It's very silent, everyone's quiet. One person, the rogador, he's called, calling out that time with military precision. And the idea behind it is what we call the cut, the court. And the idea is you're bursting all of the berries. Because if you think of a red grape, a red grape has got, a red skin. Inside you've got pulp that is clear. And in the middle of that, you've got the pips. And that's why, for example, you can make white wine out of red grapes, because you just simply use the pulp and don't use the skin. But in our particular case, what we want to do is extract as much of the color and flavor from the skin, but we don't want to break the pips. And so the human foot is very good at doing this, because you're essentially, in that cut, you're bursting it open, and then as you tread, you're working those skins against the stone base of the lagar, but you're not crushing the pips at all.
Human flesh almost has the correct amount of resistance to press a grape but not crush a seed.
Yeah, exactly. So, I mean, anyone who is at home and wishes to obviously do a trial, they can buy some grapes, put them in their bath, tread on them, count the pips. Another way to...
Fun weekend activity.
Another way to essentially understand it would be if you take a peppercorn and put a peppercorn on the table and try to crush the peppercorn with your thumb, you will not achieve it. You would need to put it under a knife or a spoon to be able to break that peppercorn. So effectively, that human foot, is working hard to extract all the color and flavor. And the reason we do this, it's in a sense, it's quite a violent process, and you're really working those hard. It's because we have a very short period of time. So after 2 hours, for example, of marching, we then have what's called liberty. And there's a lovely local poem that if you translate it into, from Portuguese into English, it would go, liberty, our liberty, only to the few you're known. If only I had liberty just to call my feet my own. And it's that sense that for those first 2 hours, somebody else has been in control of your feet, calling out. And when liberty is announced, you're in control of your own feet, you sing and dance. And out comes the accordion, the drum, traditional songs, as well as nowadays, the sort of the birdie song and the sort of conga as we dance the way around the lagars. But remember, harvest is always a celebration. It's a celebration of a whole year's worth of work and activity in the vineyard. So, the dancing is another couple of hours, and a bit of local brandy or port will get passed around. People will have fun. It's a harvest. They're enjoying it. But they'll have spent 8 hours in the vineyard picking, and they'll have spent 4 hours in the evening treading. So it's a long day, and they're going to do that in any one vineyard. That's probably going to happen for, say, 2.5 weeks. So it's a very intense process. It's a very strong community process. We get people coming back year in, year out, our local workers who will come to the vineyard, and there's always jobs for everybody in terms of the process of a harvest. Anyway, you do that on the first night, you do it on the second night. By the third day, what will have happened is the fermentation will really start to get going, and that's the natural yeasts converting the sugar. And in the process of fermentation, effectively what's happening is the yeast consuming the sugar, natural sugar. The byproduct of that is they produce carbon dioxide and it produces alcohol, okay? And it also produces heat. So those are the three things that come out of that process. And of course they multiply. The yeasts get all quite vigorous and everything sort of accelerates fairly quickly. And at that stage, all the skins will rise to the surface and form a cap. And we have what we, the punch, well, in parts of the world it's called punching down, but you basically have a stick with a sort of cross on the end, which we call a macaco. A macaco really means monkey, and that's not really the stick, it's the person pushing it down as described as, but that's what we call it, a macaco. But they're punching it down, they're keeping that cap in contact with the juice, continuing to extract color.
Yeah.
Because from when that cap forms, it's only about another 30 hours before, so 3.5 days after picking, when about half of the natural grape sugar will have converted into alcohol. And that's when we stop the fermentation. We run out that juice. We add in a neutral grape spirit. It's made from the distillation of white wine. You take 7 liters of white wine and it makes 1 liter of spirit at 77% alcohol. You're adding it to this half-fermented grape juice. It's about 7. Put the two of those together. I'm sure there's some listener there or whatever that's going to do the maths on all this, but literally 4 liters of at 7 and 1 liter at the spirit will essentially mix to produce 5 liters at 20% alcohol by volume. And at that moment, that spirit is literally fortifying. It's stopping the fermentation, and you're getting left with all that unfermented grape sugar, which is what makes port, so enjoyable.
Sure.
It also makes it one of the great sweet wines of the world. I mean, the other ways you make sweet wines, of course, would be things like with botrytis or an ice vine, or putting your grapes out under the sun to sort of raising them down. But this is traditionally how it was done. And it became very, very popular, not least because if you go back in history, there weren't many sources of natural sugar. Honey, you make a mead, or you do that. But prior to sort of sugarcane and sugar beet, which really in human history is only a couple of 100 years old, people didn't have source of sweetness, and a wine, was a good way to do that. And that, of course, helped create the popularity.
So a couple of questions about this production process as we've got to it so far. I'm interested in the stamping. I think it would surprise quite a lot of people that in your own vineyards this is still taking place. For products that are 101 markets, ubiquitous, very well-known brands that are still made in this, I was going to say handmade, but it's hand and feet. Foot-made doesn't quite have the same ring to it, does it? No. We talked about how the seeds are not pressed, and that's obviously optimal, but it still feels like the preservation of these practices, there must be something more to it than just from a physical production point of view. I'm sure you could get mills that wouldn't crush seeds but would crush grapes. So Is there something more, is it a tradition, a sort of spiritual nature to it that means that you continue to preserve these traditions? Because I would imagine you could save on costs and optimize this.
Yeah, so it's a good question, and obviously it isn't actually practical to make every litre of port that way. Okay, so we do have modern wineries where we're using plungers that would replicate that, but the difference is quality. You know, the difference is that a foot-trodden port, possibly 1.5–2% better than one that's made by a machine. Now, that might be the difference between a wine scoring 98 points and 100 points. And you say, well, how many tasters in the world can taste that difference? And the answer is very few, but we can. And if we're trying to make something that is exceptional, and we know that a process is going to lead to something being 1.5% better, we're going to continue to do it. But we literally don't have enough people to be able to tread absolutely everything. I mean, as it stands at the moment, we tread about 2,000 tons, and that would be with 400 people or so over the course of a harvest. A harvest would be some of the reason of 5 weeks. So it is still intense. Lots and lots of port companies giving it up. I mean, we probably account for 60% of all the foot treading that still takes place. But we do it, and you're quite right to point out the fact that it's expensive, but we do it because it makes the highest quality. And that, is something that you're not going to give up easily.
Sure, yeah. And do you have, is it 3 estates?
Tailors have a number of estates in the Douro. We've in fact in recent years increased our number of estates, and there's reason we can discuss about that. We have Quinta de Vargelas is probably our flagship property, which is our most easterly property. It's an extraordinary place because it sits along the edge of the River Douro, but it's on the south side of the river, so it's a north-facing bowl. So it's like an amphitheatre, and literally amphitheatre pointing due north, and that means that because of the hill and the slope of the hill, that as the sun passes round during the day, at any one part of the during the summer, part of it's in shadow, and that just gives the vines a little bit less time in the intense sun, because vines, once it gets too hot, the vines will stop working. Once you get over about 40 degrees centigrade, vines tend to slow down and not produce any sugars, stop the photosynthesis process. And so that shadow sort of helps. Also, of course, on the Douro Valley, we tend to get a diurnal wind. So as the center of Spain heats up during the day, by the time you get to sort of early evening and that equalization that takes place, you'll have a wind that sort of blows up the Douro Valley between about 6 o'clock and 7:30 in the evening. And that's bringing in air from the ocean, essentially, up. And it gives the vines a chance to recover. So we have cooler evenings, the vines recover, and then back through the whole process the next day. And that's Quinta de Vargelas, which is an iconic property. But we have others, Quinta de Junco, Quinta de Terrafeita, Terrafeita de Cima, Terrafeita de Baixo, Quinta de Aravelha, Quinta de Bergamo, Quinta de Ruga. So we've got nowadays one or two more properties. Yeah.
And how do the wines differ from one of these estates to another? What if you were going to say, let's classify them in 3 words in terms of their taste profile, how would you don't have to go through all of them, but how would you define them on a sort of flavor map, if you like?
Yeah, so someone like Vargelas is definitely more lifted fruit, more aromatic, very rich, intense fruit, whereas something like Terrafeita, which actually is about 26 miles away, it's down the valley, so closer to Porto, but it sits in a bowl surrounded by higher hills, so it tends to get more intensity, and that produces a more earthy characteristic. And of course, one of the great wines that we make is vintage port, which the very top of it doesn't come from a single vineyard, it comes from blending. And so you take something like Quinta de Vargelas and you blend it with something like Terrafeita, and this sort of symbiosis of these two sort of things coming together really gives you those additional layers of flavor and structure. Because all this conversation does make one a little bit thirsty.
I was just thinking the same thing.
Thirsty,
I was just thinking the same thing. So I'll let you take the lead on what you want.
Well, I feel we should probably have a quick run through the styles.
Let's talk about the styles, and then we can maybe drink our way through them as well.
Yeah, so why don't I reach forward for a few of these glasses, and I'll start us with port number one, which is something like a late bottle vintage. So when we look at port, we're going to taste three ports, and we're going to categorize these really in the sense of big fruit-driven ports, like a ruby, like a late bottle vintage. Typically, those will be aged in very large vats. It's something 20, 30,000 litres, where you've got a large vessel, very little surface area of wood, and as a result, you retain a lot of the colour, a lot of the very fruit flavour or freshness that you would get that from a new port. This one actually is late bottle, it's 2019. Now, an alternative to this, zoom forward again, would be something like an aged Tawny. Okay, and we got here a 10-year-old Tawny. Now, Tawny, all made the same way, same lagar, same treading, but here, rather than leaving it in one of those big vessels, we put it in what we call a small cask or a barrel. And that's what we're surrounded with. And in fact, the ones behind us here, there's some 40-year-old aging there, although that 40-year-old comes from 2011, so that's not going to be sold until 2051.
Okay, so you know in advance that this is going to be a 40-year-old Tawny.
Yeah, it's been designated, it's been chosen to be aged this way. So by aging in the small cask, and each one of these is about 600 litres, what you end up with is a large surface area of wood compared to the barley. As a result, you can see I'll just swirl these around, and I will give you something to drink in. If I swirl this, what you can see is a distinct difference in colour. You've got this dark, it's rich, full-bodied, it's going to be fruit-driven, and the other, which is lighter, more, it's the 10-year-old sort of woodier notes. So I'll slide these across the table to you. And here are the two distinct styles. And this is the 10-year-old. We make a 20-year-old, 30-year-old, 40-year-old, and go on to discuss perhaps some of the ones that we made that are evolved.
So I'm interested about the Tawny maturation. So when the wine is made, it's designated 10, 20, 30, 40. So these are not tasted along the way and pulled out of cask because they're deemed to be optimal in terms of their maturation. It's a case of defining this right from the start and then letting nature.
It's the way we make port. In the lagar, they're the same. So then what happened? Why do they end up sort of going down a different route in their aging process? And that happens through a tasting blending. That will happen, valuation and harvest, that will happen maybe 5 months after the harvest. So beginning of the year, February, late January, February, March into March, we will be tasting through all of the different ports we made last harvest, last September, and we will then be evaluating and deciding essentially at that day how that port is going to age. And once we've decided it to be a 10-year-old, that's it. It goes on its life to 10-year-old.
And those at that point, those ports have been just kept in steel, ready to be tasted?
No, they've been kept in wood.
Large wood vats.
Large wooden vats. Up in the Douro, typically. We still sort of adhere to that old process of kind of moving them down in the spring. And that's not because we bring them anymore by river. I mean, the river is now dammed. The last port coming down the river Douro was in the late 60s. And it was dammed in the early 70s. No, the reason we do that is that, as I explained earlier, that continental climate, sort of much hotter summers, colder winters. Once you've made it, yield in the wood over the winter, those colder conditions help the whites settle. And that can give you a much greater sense of the quality. And obviously when you're trying to, if you're going to age something, for example, in oxidate conditions, you might have in one of these small barrels, for 40 years. It's got to be quite a big construction wine to be able to withstand that, because this is hard graft to be in there. And of course, it's evaporating. This is evaporating every year.
Now, what are the evaporative losses like over the course of 10 or 20 years?
Well, so to make the easy one is to tell you about 20-year-olds. So if you make 2 eases of port now for a 20-year-old, in 20 years' time, they'll have one to sell. We're each half of it. Okay, so you don't lose quite so much money in a 10-year-old. But and it's it's an important point, because not only are these things evaporating every year, you're losing about 3% a year, so 3% compounding. We also empty them out each year, so it doesn't spend 10 years in a single cask. You'll put aside 100 casks. At the end of a year, you will empty all those out, mix it all together. You possibly need to wash out the casks, and then you'll refill 97 of them. And then the following year, and the second again and again.
So you're liberating barrels to put more port in.
Yeah, you're emptying, you're mixing them together, and therefore you're creating that year's worth, 10-year-old. It's also the moment that the blenders, so blenders become very, very important when they look at talking about aged Tawny, because they're accompanying these wines. And you can't really isolate a wine, so that's it, that's what I want it to be. It's in the head. People know what they're trying to achieve. So this is where blenders' experience becomes hugely important. So the glass of the Taylor 10, which we've got, and we're suddenly able to, that's the LBV, and the 10 is the other one.
Oh, sorry, 10.
Yeah, so I'll just grab the 10. And what you're going to smell with that, and dried fruit aromas, so raisins. It almost smells like a liquid Christmas cake.
Yeah, a little bit spelt out, is there, I think. Yeah.
Now this flavor, and you've got those dried fruit aromas and all that. It's lovely, fills the mouth. Wonderful richness. Now, will it consistency? So that the Taylor 10-year-old by its day is the same as the one you bought a few years ago and the one you'll buy in a few years' time. And the way you achieve that is through the blenders, because each harvest each year is going to be different. Each climatic year is going to be different, so you get slightly different evaporative rates, and yet you're trying to get something that's consistent at the end. So what the blenders will do is they'll accompany the wine, and they may need to add something that's a little bit older, possibly add something that's a little bit younger. That's why we talk about 10-year-olds being an average age, but they're aiming to get to the same consistent flavor. Consistency is hugely important in the aged Tawny business. That's why the blenders, are very, very important. If you chase the LBV, this is the 2019. Remember, this is the one that was in the big wooden vessel, so it's one where you've got much more color. You've got much more of the dark fruits, black currants, blackberries, all those sorts of aromas. Again, drink that intensity of berry fruit flavors, and lovely sort of rich black currant, blackberry, those sorts of those veg. This, of course, goes very well with dark chocolate. It can go very well with stronger cheeses, and the tradition of a stoked oak in the port. It is probably more here, whereas something like the aged Tawny, you might have that with the classic combination might do an apple pie, or tartan for example, as would in France, or you got it with a creme brulee.
Yeah.
Or a lighter cheese. If your blue cheeses are with this, here you're really with your camemberts, or your softer creamy cheeses, for example, would be with your aged Tawny. If you wanted to go down chocolate, here a very intense dark chocolate, here maybe an old chocolate mousse, I think would go very well with the 10-year-old or 20, 30, whichever age.
I think sometimes it's useful to think about the flavors you can smell or taste in the liquid, and then just take that to the food, and to take that to a dish or a plate of food. And so, as you say, with the Tawny, because you're getting dry fruits and sultanas, that feels like, rum and raisin ice cream. You have them go with something creamy, like you say, creme brulee. And then with the LBV, because it's those darker fruits, that feels more chocolatey as a pairing.
Yeah. And that's a good combination. Obviously, when you get down a little bit older, you get to something like a 30-year-old or a 40-year-old, you may not wish to necessarily pair that. You'd be able to just have that on the session, or something that's, a 40-year-old, we needed 4 liters 40 years ago, some big one to sell today. And bearing in mind that your generation's all in the business for probably 30, 35 years, you are selling what was made by the previous generation. And just thinking about the history, just thinking about what's changed in all of that time, and being able to enjoy it. It is, when you go to those really old Tawnies, they are things to sort of sit and consider. They're going to be very tense. They're going to be much more honey, a bit more nutty. They can really wrap around the whole tongue and the throat.
Well, just that concentration that's happened over that time, because you're only losing water and alcohol. All right, everything else besides the water and alcohol is staying in there.
Yeah. Although what's happening is losing colour. So the aged Tawnies, as they get older, typically they get lighter because they're losing colour. Only the wood. Although there's only a finite amount of colour they can lose before they start to pick up colour from the wood. The very old Tawnies often have a sort of olive green edge on the meniscus, and that's one of the ways you can tell a very old Tawny. And that's coming from colour that's come from the wood.
Interesting. And it's interesting that olive green, because with wood, looking at whiskey, brandy, and so on, you'd normally associate golden hues, right?
Yeah. Well, we go through that phase, the golden, and then you go on beyond.
If you go long enough, it goes green. Just talking here about the evaporative losses, it's remarkable how much you lose over that period of time, and I think that probably lends a certain additional value to people who are buying older Tawnies, knowing how much has been lost. What about the alcohol? What's the ratio of alcohol and water loss? Is that the ABV need adjusting at the end of maturation sometimes?
Yes, I mean, there's, lots of people will make an assumption that it's all the alcohol that evaporates, but it's a lot of water, and there's a lot of complex science in that. But normally you'd have a small adjustment, but surprisingly small. Where I think you need to put it in sort of context, for a company like ours, which is the leader in the aged Tawny business, we have very, very substantial stock levels. So we would have somewhere in the region of about 40 million litres of stock. Give you a sort of, what's that mean? We could fill about 17 Olympics when he pulls full, which also a different twist on the Olympics.
It would indeed. It would be an interesting event.
But the evaporation, that way you'll do it is with your evaporation, could be losing up to 1,000 litres a day, 800 to 1,000 litres a day in evaporation. It's just,
there's nothing you can do about it. I know there's been a lot of experiments in the past, so in the spirits industry, about wrapping casks in cling film and things like that. It just doesn't work.
You wouldn't have style, and if you don't want it to evaporate, pocket in stainless steel, you just won't get it. You won't get that treat. So, and in fact, they're probably in sense brings us to the third port that I brought along, which is a vintage port. Now, this is the young vintage port, so we're going to say it with a lot of intense colour. But vintage port is selected and made and bottled when it's 2 years old. Okay, so this is actually 2017. Very young, dark. It's actually really darker and more intense even than the LBV, even though it's 2 years. 2 years older than the 2019 LBV.
So just to clarify for me there, so it's in the large barrels for 2 years before it goes into bottle, correct? Yeah.
And what happens is that we make a first selection in the spring following the harvest. We make a selection of things that could be potential vintage port. We then wait another winter for the wines to close up even further and give us a chance to really judge their intensity, their power, their structure.
And that's what you're looking for to designate it as vintage, its intensity?
Yes, you're looking for power and intensity. So, and how do you just sort of describe that? Because obviously you want really dense fruit, but you need a lot of structure. You need, intense richness. You want good tannic structure, but you don't want it to be very astringent. So you don't want too much tannin that makes it tannins like biting on a lemon. It can be, that's not what you're after. But you need enough. But you want those tannins to be silky but firm. And these are wines. If you look at this is again. Just to make a point, even though it's 2 years older than the LBV, you can see that it's dark, and these lights are picking it up. But you can see that it's a darker wine. When we put our nose in it, we're going to get big intensity, a lot of those.
Slightly floral, I would say.
Floral, but a lot of those black fruits as well. But then you've got also hints of violets, and a little almost piney notes in there, all sorts of lots of different levels of complexity.
Yeah.
And then you got what we call mouthfeel. So you got something, there's a phrase it's used in books, which was the iron fist in a velvet glove. And in a sense, that's where young vintage port is. They're very drinkable, incredibly easy to drink. This, you really feel it. Powerful wine, tannins are there. You get tannin. The sense of tannins will always be a little bit of the teeth, the dryings on the teeth. So that's the tannins. But it's not astringent. The aftertaste is still there. It's holding on to the flavor, but some sort of with that lovely rich fruit, but also structure and power. You've got something really good with a glass of Anecdotes.
Yeah, I mean, it feels, I guess that balance between tannin and the sweetness makes it highly palatable, because you get a slight drying sensation, not, like you say, verging on astringent, but slightly. But then the sweetness sort of caresses that through and supports it. If you didn't have the sweetness there, it would be it'd be quite a dry experience, probably.
Yeah. And you need the body.
Yeah.
You need that texture. As you sort of taste it, you push your tongue against the roof of your mouth, you're getting, refreshed all that lovely fruit. Now, this, remember, is bottled after 2 years. So whenever you have a vintage port, this is 2017, also had a bottling year, so it's bottled in 2019. We typically bottle in about June, July. We make our announcement of whether we're going to make a vintage port on St. George's Day. So it was an ancient tradition that we started in the early 90s.
Well, there's another British connection there, right? Yeah.
Well, it's partly that. It's also the end of April for us seems to be the right moment, because you'll always find it's always very difficult if you try to taste vintage ports, in January, February, even if and that's after the second winter, it's still cold, it's still very closed. You need that sort of spring for them to open up, the wines open up in spring equinox. They really come to life. So you don't want to be hurried in your decision, because after all, when you make good sport, make a decision that will be around for 50, 60 years.
Yeah.
So people buying into the 17th, and maybe they had a grandchild, maybe they had a child, or maybe they were married in 2017, and they want to have something to drink on their 25th wedding anniversary. This will be their book. It'll be different by that, because what will happen is that it ages in the complete absence of oxygen. So whereas we'll be talking about the influence of evaporation and making a 10-year-old or 20-year-old here, it just ages in the bottle. Although you'd lie this down in the cellar, and as it ages, some of the color particles will actually drop out and form the deposit. That's typically why we decant vintage port. But any bottle typically that comes with a full driven cork, and of course remember, here in Portugal, we're the leaders of processing cork. Like 50% of the world's corks are grown in Portugal, or 75% of them are actually processed here. But here is a very big cork, actually. You can see lovely smooth edge on that, fantastic high quality. A year and a half each.
Are they really? Wow, good business to be in.
Really good. Yes. Good corks, but they are expensive. Of course, you're trying to preserve a wine that's very valuable, that's going to have a long life. Then you look at something like an aged Tawny, we have just a stopper cork. It's a short cork. And this is because something like an aged Tawny, which also have a bottling date, but it's typically bottled to order. So we'll receive an order from the markets, we'll bottle it up, and then send it out. This isn't going to get better in the bottle. No, don't lay this one down. You buy and consume it. The great thing about this, and the fact that it's been in these casks, is it also lasts by a long time once it's over.
Yeah, you don't have to drink it within a few days.
No, typically vintage port, you would, young vintage port lasts a little bit longer, but I personally, I bring out vintage port for friends over to dinner or a special occasion, something like that. He's told me I have a bottle of that in my fridge.
Just keep it in the fridge, right? And pull it out when you need it.
Shelf life on a 10-year-old is going to be somewhere to the region of 4 or 6 weeks.
It's not going to last that long, though, let's be honest.
Are we?
Not if it's there in the fridge door every time you open it. Every time you reach for a pint of milk.
Yeah, well, did I put it in tea?
There's a cocktail recipe there, maybe. Or maybe not.
But so it's different styles, and as I say, all made the same way. The aging and the selection is what's important. But we've gone. I mean, with it, we created late body vintage back in the 1970s, and it really was an alternative vintage port. That's why it's in the neg late body vintage. The idea being to spend the whole 5 or 6 years in that big barrel, so it isn't bottled. After 2 years, it spends more time there. It's put through a filtration process so that it isn't going to throw a deposit, which basically means that you can pop it out again, stop the cork, so it's bottled.
So it gives it a longer shelf life once they open the vintage.
About a month is what we would look for with that. And you'll see most port, because of that fortification, they'll last. That's the dry wine called the pink, the rosé. But when we did rosé, it was great innovation. A lot of people, they were shocked, horror, Rosé Port. And we did. The funny thing was that had come up with the idea, said to the sort of wine team, can we do a Rosé Port? It's not. Give it a go, and they said, we went away, experimented. We then went to our regulator and said, I understood him up, said, I'd like to make some Rosé Ports to cart. And said, well, on and up, here it is. Put it on the table. Said, doesn't exist. You go, does, we made it. And he's sitting in the legislation, port is either white or red. It doesn't exist as a rosé. He said, well, okay, that's a little bummer. How do you get around that? I said, well, you need parliamentary, you need the law and Parliament, fast in Parliament to create Rosé Port. And at which point before, I thought suddenly, that's not really going to happen. A, to get government time. B, we would need to garner the support of the entire port industry, and we've had lots of people going, well, don't do that, lad.
Well, yeah, especially they might see that you're trying to get a competitive advantage.
Yeah, so half the people would be there, great idea, thank you for giving us a good idea. The other half would be, gosh, that's not the way to do it. Not about. Mm-hmm. So I say, well, so you're right, we can't do that. How do we get around this? And we actually applied for and got a European trademark for the word pink. And so we brought it to market, obviously with the knowledge of our regulator, that nobody else knew about. Essentially, we launched it using the brands. We have brand Croft, the trademark word pink. You can make a call without saying what it is.
Right.
As long as we using trademarks. So it was pink, the Croft pink port. Had all the technical specifications to be port, so fortification, and there are residual sugars and everything else. On the back label, it simply described itself as a light ruby. Okay, because we couldn't call it a rosé. We launched on Valentine's Day 2008. The marketing, that was great, and everyone loved it. It was a huge success. And funny enough, from that launch, it took until July 2009 for the law to be passed and rosé to be created, because everybody else saw this is a great idea around, and then the whole pressure came to change the law. So, quite a fun story at some point. You had to, wiggle through the regulations to get to where you want to be. But what was really interesting about it, so we innovated, created this, and we launched it in a number of markets, also in the United States, and but did it in a few selected markets. So New York, Florida, Texas, California. And about a year later, we had, we'd been was customer in Texas. It bought somewhere in the region of, 1,000 bottles. Huge amount of ports. These people, what are they doing? And there was a restaurant called Little Pigs, a big Texan. restaurant little big, and you don't know whether it's a five-seater restaurant or it's, who knows. That's
Probably big.
It turned out not to be that large. It turned out to be a sort of bird or stick place. But what they had done is they had poured the Croft Peak into their slushy regime.
Wow.
So they had innovated the innovation, because obviously with the residual sugar and with the alcohol, it doesn't freeze.
Yeah.
So if you take something like this OPB, and if you had an ice cream maker at home, you could convert this into adult ice cream, essentially, because it isn't going to freeze. The alcohol and the sugar will stop it. And so they would literally making it, they were putting it in a high wall, they were doing a sort of half a strawberry sort of over the top and a sort of sprig of mint or something, and they were serving it literally as sort of adult sorbet.
That's incredible. So, are we going to see some Croft branded margarita machines all over the world now? This is perfect serve of Croft Pin.
Well, funny enough, of course, we love the idea, and we took it immediately. We actually introduced here in Portugal. We bought out of the sushi machines, and we gave them to Seaside Guard.
Yeah. Well, when it's hot, right?
But it was quite a wonderful story, because we got pushed the boundary of innovating and creating something with no idea that somebody would then UCLA data even further and come up with an extraordinary idea.
This is it, and I think that's the kind of activity you need your customers to be doing, is thinking out the box with port. Like you say, you're innovating a new category really of port. And then, how can you use this? And I think mixed drinks, slushy machine is definitely taken to the extreme, but if it works, it works. And like you say, you need sweetness in drinks that are going in slushy machines, because when they get colder, it suppresses that sweet effect. And what do you got with that?
Yeah, that's all that. Yeah, I think, see a lot of port obviously served in restaurants. And, it's all, again, when I travel and talk to people about it, and do sort of sommelier education and so on and so forth, it surprised me at a restaurant to get to the end of the meal and they simply ask people, do they want coffee? I think these people know whether they want coffee or tea. Kind of needn't necessarily ask them. I think that the trick is to ask them whether they want a glass of port, because they might not have been thinking about it. Yeah, suddenly, a glass of port, that's a nice idea. And you see restaurants, for example, be very successful offering things like a century of port. So they do, a small glass of a 10-year-old, 20-year-old, 30-year-old, 40, so 10, 20, 30. Yeah. Probably makes up to 100 years. Just a half pour, full glass, so, and the people that sort of taste their way would see this extraordinary evolution that happens in difference from 20 to 30 or 40 years. They just concentrate down and create all these unique flavors. And that's just a fantastic experience. And after all, I think one of the reasons people go out to dinner, rather than just sit at home on front of the TV, is the little experience. And so if any restaurant would open your eyes and give you that sort of something different you hadn't really thought about, and go, that gives you the wow man, that gives you the memories. And that's so important in our business.
Yeah. Just back to the vintage port for a second. There's good years and there's bad years. There's vintages that are considered to be great, and other ones are presumably not so great. How is that assessed? Is this after the 2 years in the large barrels? What are you looking for there? And also, if it's deemed to be a good year, are you allocating more port to that vintage and less for a year perhaps, or is it always a fee?
Yeah, it's a very good question, because there's all this mystery of the process of decoration, and some people think a sort of port barrels is in some sort of dark, making with a sort of thumbs up, thumbs down. The reality is that we try to make all of our port as though we're making instant port. That's our objective, because that's the pinnacle of what we do. And in that sense, that's how Taylor's really differs from many of the other port companies, because we're trying to make vintage port. All of our other products are downward extensions from vintage port, whereas many people just take a lot of port and select the better things to be their vintage. So we kind of have a completely inverted, a different approach to the industry. When it's good, nature's really given you something that's extraordinary, then we'll declare it as and make it as classic. And if you look back over the years, you would probably average somewhere in the region of 3 times a decade. So if we go back and look at, we made the we had extraordinary run actually. So we did the 2018, 2017, 2016. But prior to the 16, we had done the 2011, 2009, 2007, 2003, 2000, 97, 94, 92, 85, 83, 80, 77, 75.
Not 82, huh? That's a shame.
82, we did. 82, we made what we call a single quinta. So we took a single vineyard and we made that. And we would consider that it's something that we make into, for example, Quinta de Reservas 1982. We would consider it's a bit earlier maturing. So, whereas something which we make great classic, we would still expect to be drinking well when it, 40, 50, 60 years old, perhaps. Things like the single quintas, we would normally expect them to be ready to drink when they're drinking as mature wines. As you always drink out Wings Port, they drink these mature wines when they're sort of 10, 12 years old, and probably last till they're sort of 25. 25 is still, a very, very fine old age. But one of the extraordinary things about the Wine Institute is a statistic that many people sort of aren't aware of, is that 95% of the world's wines consumed within the first year of production are 4.5% in the first 5 years, half of 1% over 5 years. Here we are, taking LBD, that's 5 years old.
Yes.
A 10-year-old.
Yes.
In a port that might last, 50, 60 years. So we are certainly at that fine edge.
All three of these wines.
At all of that top end of what happens. But we're really looking, it's a house decision. It's our decision as to whether we make a vintage port or not. And for us, it's about reputation. If we make a dud, we're going to live with that for a very, very long time. So, you tend to be incredibly cautious.
But at that early stage that in 20, 30, 40 years' time, that this vintage is likely to stand up to the test of time?
Yeah. And that's experience. That's the tasting panel. Myself, colleagues, the tasting team, the blenders, the winemakers, all of us were a panel of about 11 people. And probably if you added up those sort of years of experience, it's about 400 years of experience. And that's hugely important because you cannot substitute that. That experience counts. And because people do, you need to know what's going to be like. Of course, you're always tasting back what the decisions you made. Yes. And then,
Really?
Taking back, rearview mirror is always there to remind you, keep you on track.
You mentioned earlier on in the conversation some of the very old vintage ports that you bottled. VDOP, Scion, Taylor's 1896, Single Harvest, Kingsman Edition. Some of these wines containing ports over 100 years. You're a lover of history, I know. So how do you think about the winemakers who made these wines 100 plus years ago, 19th century, and what do you think that they would think of the wines that you're bottling today?
Yeah, so those wines were aged toys. They was literally sitting in barrels like this. If I take the first one we really did, which was Stein, which goes back to 1863. And when we launched that, we did the booklet. We sort of looked at the things that were launched in 1860, what was happening in the world. You had the sort of American Civil War was going on. You got, the birth of the Red Cross, all sorts of thought. You've got the first hot air balloon flight with Monsieur Montgolfier in Paris. So you've got all these monumental moments of history. When we did the 1896, we were able to talk about the birth of the automobile. Put in 1863. It wasn't that.
No.
It was all horses and
those were the first railroads.
Yeah, I mean, the railroad hadn't got to Douro. The railroad did the extra Douro until the 1870s. So, yes, it was a different epoch. Many of the ways that the vineyards are being looked after and national post-trading was all the same. That hasn't changed. But you cast your mind back, think to what the world was like, and at a small world, less than a billion people, very, very different planet, different times. But you look at the Douro, the Douro, let's say, probably didn't change much. If you think that the Douro's really changed in, say, the last 30, 40 years. I mean, I can remember in the 80s when you go out to a quite quick straight that the Douro was on the track. Because you went by car to Barcelos, it was a 4.5-hour journey. And you could do it by train in 3. Nowadays, the roads all opened up. It went there, and then Porto was not connected by motorway to Lisbon until 1993. Wow. We didn't get electricity in the house of Barcelos until 1978. Prior to that, you were on olive oil wells. Well, that's how we lived. That's how we lived in the house. You know, I mean, so in the sense that in the mid-70s, different to how it was a century before. And it was, it's a very remote region, and people are still doing things exactly the same way that their fathers and grandfathers had done it. But of course, the world was so different. And the radical change that has taken place in the last 30 years. And I think one of the reasons, for example, that the tourism has got such an important growth here in Portugal at the moment, is because people are coming to see something that it still has all this old world charm. That the city of Porto is got sort of medieval buildings, top Bren buildings, and the Baroque buildings on top of that. And modern architecture on top of all that, in streets that sometimes are extremely narrow. Yes, where you can almost imagine them calling out to, say, through the swaps out the window to avoid land that wants other people. So, and the Douro Valley itself, back in the 19th century, it wasn't dammed, so it was a very narrow river where they would, for example, put up mobile water mills to crush the grape. And they would grow grape actually up in parts of the Douro, but they harvested earlier. But yeah, they would put up these temporary mills, use the river, and it'll crush the grape. It would be relieved with all the spring flood. So, life, yes, very different. The world, very different. And what is extraordinary is to, as you say, is to encapsulate that sort of moment of history in a glass. And it's what's important, I think, when you're drinking liquid history like that, is you take your time. You pause, you reflect, you sip, you enjoy the aromas, you think of what has happened in the intervening years, and that creates a degree of connection. I think it also produces humility, because you can reflect in a living product of wine, 150-year-old wine, 100-year-old wine, just reflect all the changes that have taken place. So yeah, here's still, it's something, the fruit of the earth, that is still there to be enjoyed.
Yeah, I agree. I think a lot of us have great deal of respect for art, and you're a fantastic piece of art that's old, and you appreciate the history and the moment of time that was made. But I think probably less people have a respect for liquids in that sense. And yeah, when you drink something like a very old whiskey or whatever it is, it's such a personal experience. It's literally entering your body. Well, you could argue the photons, the piece of light that art are into, surely too. But with taste and aroma and texture, it feels like such a vivid experience. And I think it carries just as much weight and gravitas as an old piece of art does as well, because it's crafted by an artist in the past, and it's been selected by an artist in the present. And that same artist or generations of artists have cared for it, looked after it, and tested it, and ensured that it carries through for future generations to drink.
Absolutely true. And of course, it's typically momentary, because once you've drunk it, it's gone. It's gone. Art, sometimes you see a picture, you may only ever see it once, and of course, it just sits in your memory, the same as the wine might. But often when it's in a physical form, you might go back and look at it. But it's hard to go back and revisit a very old wine. It's drunk.
Yeah.
It's an old whiskey. And that's why I think, I make the point of
giving it the honor to sort of sit and spend time with it. It's like sitting with an old friend. That you're not going to rush that. You're going to take it. You're going to take it gently, think about it, reflect properly, and create those extraordinary memories, because life is nothing but a series of created memories. And there's something like the old port or whiskey or rum, whatever. It is all part of that process. There's here in the city, we've got in the drinking vessel museum, which is probably the one in the world, which reflects really humans' involvement with alcohol over 9,000 years. And what makes that extraordinary is each of those vessels has also got somebody drinking a liquid, whether it be in celebration of something or during some religious ritual or whatever. But they commune, if you like, with that drinking vessel, and it's now sits as a piece of history, but also as a sort of scent of memory to the moments, and it was used for whatever purpose it was created. It's an extraordinary thing.
Yeah, the Art of Drinking Museum. I want to talk to you a little bit about that, but also you've kind of created 5 or 6 museums and put them all into one. Maybe there's even more, I've lost count, I'm sure you know. But the world of wine, or WOW, as it's also known, it strikes me as a sort of wine theme park, effectively. I've had the fortunate touring around pretty much all of it now, and I'm not very well clued up on wine tourism. When it comes to spirits, I'm a little bit more comfortable with that. But I struggle to imagine that it has a competition anywhere in the world in terms of a wine experience that's so complete, because you have a cork museum, you have a rosé museum, you have a wine experience, you have the art drinking, as you mentioned, and of course all of this is surrounded by your port lodges as well. Can you maybe talk a little bit about the world of wine, how this came into being, and how I suppose it's supporting the tourism of Porto and Port?
Yeah, so the story really started with the creation of a hotel called the Eggman, which is a wine hotel. It sits there in the historic area. And one of the extraordinary things about where we are is we're really in the very center of the city, on the south side of the river. Politically, it's called Gaia. Yeah, but really, we're not drinking Vino de Gaia, we're drinking Vino de Porto. So, historically, the walled city, the castellated city, was on the north side, and on the south side, you had the warehouses and so on. And right in the heart of all that, all these sorts of warehouses, we kind of had, and then we still had land, because there hadn't been anything built on it, because this area was restricted, and they changed their laws in 2006. We built a hotel called the Yeamans, so connects back to the family visits, Taylor, Fladgate, and Yeaman. And at the time, everybody thought I was completely mad building that hotel, because it was in the wrong part of the city. It wasn't with a brand. It was relatively small. It was only 82 rooms. The best hotel in town was the Sheraton. In the business district, 266 rooms. It was a proper hotel. Hoteliers, if you like. Here we were building something that looked out at the city, in big grounds, 7 acres of grounds, 82 rooms, independent, and twice the price of the Sheraton. But the logic really was that what was people interested to come and learn about Port? They're interested in Port, they're interested in wine. If they're interested in wine, they're interested in good food. So hence I hired a chef called Ricardo Costa, who set up the restaurant. He previously had a Michelin star, and we opened in July 2010, and by November 2011 we had our first Michelin star. We got our second in 2016, and fingers crossed, who knows where the journey will end. But that really put the city and the destination on the map. So prior to the Eggman, the lowest season of the year was July to August. The high seasons were May and October, because
people came to visit their company, their production companies, and sign the accounts, do the budgets for the following year. This was a business destination. And now it's become very much, in 50 years, an amazing tourist destination because it's kind of being discovered. But we were the pioneers essentially of that.
But I think as more people come, you then looking at, well, what do they do? There weren't a lot of museums. And there's a very simple reason for that, is that this city has always been controlled by the bishop. The bishop Porto, and when you get here, you'll see the palace and the hill next to the cathedral. The cathedral was built in 1111 by the widow of Richard Burgundy. It was the overlord of Portugal at that time. It built this, and it was incredible cathedral. And then next to it, this extraordinary palace that was built 600 years after the cathedral, wasn't it? So the bishop was in control. And if you were a nobleman, you couldn't spend more than 3 nights in the city without paying a fine. Okay? So no, they weren't here, they didn't do that. The noble house was outside the city limits, often quite some distance from it. So the relevance of that is that if you look at the way most of Europe is developed, it's old palaces from noble families where never can afford to live in it anymore, or it's royal palaces of the country that's become a republic. And these get converted into museums and galleries. London is a very fine example of some extraordinary buildings that become wonderful galleries and museums that had previous uses of this family home for nobility. Didn't exist here. The big buildings here are churches, monasteries. They're still used as churches. Not too many monasteries or that anymore, but they're still religious buildings. So there weren't any museums. And yet museums were a very, very important part of what people want to experience. I think we moved on from a time when we had tourists. Tourists tends to go to a place for what it does to actually. Aldar was a very good example of it. We went to the Aldar. If you were eating food you had back home, you with people from back home, you lay on the beach for some time. So it was about getting taco, having the beach, and that was early tourism. Today we're talking about travelers, and travelers want to go to places and discover and experience and learn and interact and have the experiences, because hence wine tourism is growing. But also, that interest in discovery is hugely important. And hence, what we did is we converted a series of old port lodges for this purpose, which we call the World Wine. But it's really a cultural district. And it got a museum that tells the history of the city. So if you want to learn about Porto and why people first came to live here and how the Romans developed it and various stages through its life, then you go to that museum. It's called Prazo. Prazo is Porto region across the ages. The play on it is the River Douro is de ouro, so river of gold. Okay, Prazo is the Portuguese for silver.
Oh, okay, so yeah, well, that makes sense when you explain it. But
it tells a story, and likewise, people are motivated to come here because they're interested in port. It's logical we have a wine experience, and that tells the story of how wine is made. It's relevant to any wine made anywhere in the world. We obviously use Portugal rather than port. It's table wine or fortified sparkling. It's got a whole lot in there. We use Portugal as the example to tell the story. It is really the story about it. It's the best wine museum in the world, most. We take a little bit more of a light-hearted approach when we look at rosé, because rosé is much more of a lifestyle drink, so that's much more Instagrammable and jolly good.
We've got a ball pool in there, which my children very much enjoyed when we came to visit, and that was fantastic, because then my wife and I got to sit down and drink a glass of rosé whilst they entertained themselves. So I can't ask for more than that. The whole experience, to be honest with you.
Yeah, look, the big ball pit is enormous fun, but again, with wine sometimes we could take it too seriously. I mean, sometimes the wine industry does, so we all get sort of terribly excited about whether there's been a sort of malolactic fermentation, what's our residual sugar, so all this. It's most what you talking about care.
does it go well with the cheese and the fish or the meat? How many triggers? Dit is like a we serve this in one of the restaurants there with steak. You have a nice juicy steak with a glass of young vintage pork. It's extraordinary because obviously it's like the meat and the slight saltiness that often you add on steak combining with the young, big, powerful fruit. It's extraordinary.
And giving that little bit of sweetness as well. I mean, I think steak can sometimes benefit from that, like balsamic, and you get kind of thing it works really well, isn't it? So, yeah, but it's not an obvious choice, though, I don't think.
And that's always the fun bit, is you're getting people that experience. So you see people say, if you give them the confidence to try it, and it's a dish there, and the team will precariously explain why, and then people, actually, that's totally good, and they have it. So so we tried with this, creating this cultural district, really to repurpose old pork lodges, but to create the content in the city. And because we own a certain amount of it, we put it in, for example, we put in a chocolate museum. It tells the story of chocolate. Chocolate's an extraordinary story, but we also had enough space to put in a little factory making chocolate. So people can actually see chocolate being made. So all these things were here, and we hope that would work really as also as a catalyst for some of our competitors to repurpose their old warehouses into, again, other types of museums or experiences or galleries, because you can really change the whole city and create, say, content for a city that, for historical reasons, didn't have it.
Well, that's fantastic. To be developing or contribute towards the development of Porto as a cultural destination. Obviously, we've had a pandemic in the middle of all of this, so I guess the data is not exactly clear, but from my own personal perspective, it feels like a lot more of my friends and family are beginning to talk about Porto, whereas 15, 20 years ago, that might not have happened. What are you seeing in terms of tourism data in the recent years? And also, I'm interested to know about visits to Douro as well. How many people actually get down, or over there, I should say, who comes to Porto?
Yeah, so tourism is growing, and with that, a lot of new hotels, a lot of exciting restaurants. I mean, if you go back 30 years, we probably had one international quality restaurant. That was it. And now you've got in the 2 stars, 4 1 stars, 15 or 20 that could have a star. And probably behind that, another 50. Amazing restaurants. So the chef scene here is incredible. It's a lot of amazing food. The wines, of course, whether that be fortified wines or still wines. That's all exciting. A lot of the old part of town that have been in really decay. Those buildings have been re-upped, so there's lots of hotels and certain amount of Airbnb and so on. So it's quite exciting what's been going on. We've got a new airport that was put in here for the Euro football competition 20 years ago. And there's a lot of capacity there, so it's a big airport, and as a result, it's quite easy to get through. There's still more capacity in that airport. It has about just under 6 people per year through it. Compared to Gatwick, which is 65 million, so put it in context there. But it's grown a little bit, but it's 20 minutes from the centre of town.
Yes.
So everything is, and we're lucky there. We've got this river. We've got this very old city with Roman roots, or pre-Roman roots. We've got the Atlantic Ocean and beautiful beaches. So you can come here to surf. You can come here to walk in the parks. You could take tram ride to the seaside to have lunch with fresh fish from the ocean with a glass of Algarve being vert from there in the north, or you can journey by train, car, or whatever up into the Douro. And people clearly are making that journey. It is now like fast get it used to be, so people can go up for a day trip, and typically they'll leave the hotel at sort of 9:30 in the morning, arrive in the Douro at 11, visit a winery, do a tasting, have a nice lunch, visit another winery, do another tasting, get back in their car or back on their train, and get back down to the city. So, and that will grow. And the reason, of course, is clearly because it's still undiscovered. It's still very, very authentic. It's not packed. There are some parts of Europe where you're seeing it push back against tourism in some cities because they're just overwhelmed. And that isn't the case here. Obviously, there are more in the summer. You could see
summertime, there's certainly many more people than you'll get in the winter. They're perfect moments to. I mean, I personally would prefer to be in the Douro in April, May, June, in harvest, September, October, and possibly when it's super hot because they're to the ocean. But lots of people will be heading up there for that sort of blast of dry heat that you get, and those extraordinary star-filled nights. Drinking this under the heaven is incredible, and people will do it. But they'll start. They start as early as February as they go up there and see the almond blossom. So regions also got almond trees which go into sort of white blossom or pink blossom in and around February. And so you'll see this dramatic landscape, steep hills, this sort of river, which at that stage has picked up a lot of the soil, so it's a sort of ochre color, and then the hillsides green, but then these amazing sort of blossoms, and that's the time when you're out there walking. Wait a month, go to April, place full of wildflowers, and very extraordinary. So yeah, more people are going, more people will go. The region will develop. In the sense, it's really like Tuscany was perhaps 40 or 50 years ago, and so it's still sort of on the cusp of being discovered, and it will be discovered.
I'm interested in any sort of historical anecdotes or tales about the brand visiting on the way, perhaps some of the past owners, operators. Do you have any of your favorite stories from the history of the brand? It's a long history. So.
Well, it's a long history, and it's not just one of the oldest street companies, it's also one of the oldest companies in the world. Some of those companies don't last, the old, the third generation. We're knocking on the door of the 14th generation. So, yeah, I mean, there are fun stories. I think one that perhaps brings it into focus, which happened about 120, 130 years after we'd started. Okay, just put it in context. And that was when, after the French invasion, Arthur Wesley basically became the Duke of Wellington. The troop came up here. They Battle of Porto was really the beginning of the end of Napoleon. But they chased him up the Douro Valley, and so Napoleon troops retreated. We have a puppy called Sangarral, we call the first estate, and there was a brand that Tabor's first estate. But that particular winery, which is the one we bought in 1744, became a field hospital for Wellington's troops.
Wow.
And apparent of the reason being that inside the winery there is a natural spring which flows about 8 casks of water a day. So it was nothing to do with the fact that it was full of port. There was lots of alcohol around. It was because of the fresh water. But can this be imagined that sort of red coach, in there, totally inappropriate for the Douro heat, marching up there. But when Egypt retreating to the winery to be succored with a glass of port.
Good Amasato. And good for the spirit as well, yeah.
So that's fun. But over the years, obviously, we've seen lots of exciting things, and history continues to be made. I mean, there's a wonderful story, much more recent, but when you may remember the first Gulf War, the Americans put together what they call the Coalition of the Willing. I remember that, but it involved going to as many NATO countries as possible and asking for the support. Anyway, they decided to have a top secret meeting with Dick Cheney and his wife with entities in Portugal at Keystone the Ships. And so top secret it was that we were told, there's going to be 25 people for lunch, and they'll have their meeting and do what they do and then disappear. And of course, being top secret is somebody has to tell somebody in their district, but tell somebody else who's in their district or whatever. So about 75 people turned up for lunch. And of course, reasonable chaos ensues because it's in the middle of nowhere. There's no local shop. Everything has to be packed. So it was literally a question of the 5 loaves and the 5 fishes being spread out. But the funniest part of the story is they'd actually been delivered by a big Schmeek helicopter into a corner of the vineyard
but it was the land to remove them, to let them out, but not to sit and wait and take off from there because of the space. So they went out to the village up behind, about 4 or 5 miles away, called Orlish. And Orlish was a football pitch. And so they landed these 2 big Chinook helicopters on the football pitch. Now, football pitch in the Douro, as I described the area with the sense of, 45-degree hills, how the hell do the football pitch on that? Well, the answer is you cut it in and you
make a big terrace.
You get a big terrace. So what happened is that Atlantis had big Portugal offered its navy. It was about 2 ships, and cool. Everyone was happy and enjoyed your time, and Rosé Port, well, off they went back up to the village to take off. And there was an honor guard around the edge of the football pitch. These soldiers standing properly up. And in they got into the plane that should be big helicopter thing. So as it took off, the downdraft from the blades literally blew over the soldiers. Which, so the guys on the bit which had been cut down, that was against the thing, the other side fell over the edge. And of course, being proper soldiers, what do they do? They got brushed themselves down, got back up to attention, stood up. The second helicopter take off and do precisely the same thing again. So these are fun moments. But I probably, in literally the building we're in late 90s, we had a visit from, they hosted something called the Iberian American Conference, which is where we had the political leaders of Porto, Spain, plus everyone in Latin America, Mexico, South. And this is, and Fidel Castro turned up to this. And he hadn't been to one for many years. Anyway, so they decided to hold it here at Taylor's, being iconic and very rich country. So they were riding little minivans. So the first minivan turned up with the King of Spain, and the present Prime Minister was also, my father took with those people, had like the second minibus, which had Fidel Castro and a bunch of presidents from America, like walking around. And I was expecting, I said to you, how Port's made this, because the Port Swede told her, and so Fidel almost stuck his digit on nose and it's, where do you buy your sugar? I said, well, President Castro, we don't buy sugar, actually sweet. I said, wait, buy your sugar. And he kept on getting worse. I thought, let's say, how do we do this? So we went round, we got more sign of it, a plaque, and so on. I then 2 hours ago, my partner said, look, can you explain that we don't add sugar to port? And so we had there's these wonderful photographs that he told the story here. But the King of Spain stepped in to be the translator. So nothing was missed. So he was translating the English into Spanish for Fidel. So the message got across that there was no need to try to sell us sugar.
Do you think that was
We've got not to. Yeah, I mean, he focused on the cigars, because put the cigars, and they really are. I think somebody was said he got fixated on the sugar. All these things, provide the richness to life and so on. And over the years, over the centuries, there's been many of them.
I know you're a former military man yourself, and I would be remiss if I didn't take the opportunity to try, and it's going to be somewhat tenuously, between 2 of your great passions, connect them together. Obviously, you have the collection of drinking vessels. You're a scholar of drinking history, but I understand that you also collect daggers and swords.
Yes.
Yeah. I think I have a way of tenuously linking this as the other. Perhaps you have better links than this, but give me a chance. So you may be aware that one of some classic corked cocktails is a flip. And these, in the more modern era, are made using a whole egg and some port. Sometimes you might add a little bit of extra sugar to it as well, just to sweeten up. The whole thing's shaken up, poured out. It's something like an eggnog, but with port and all the sort of fruity flavors that come with it. The origins of that drink, however, go back to colonial North America. And the egg is never a part of the original recipe, okay? The way this drink used to be made was that you would go into your tavern in North America into the 17th century. And there would be a big bowl, punch bowl on the bar. And in that bowl would be usually a spirit. Maybe it would be an imported wine, could be port even, along with beer, locally brewed beer. And what you would do is you would go to the fireplace of the bar, and inside that fireplace you'd have pokers. One of which is called a loggerhead, which is like a poker with a ball on the end. And you'd heat up this ball, and then plunge it into the bowl, and everything would froth up, and it would actually caramelize some of the sugars in there, so you'd create bitterness or tannins or wood shop bad with the sugar, and of course it would warm up as well. And then you drink this liquid, which then has a sort of nice bittersweet quality to it. And this is a time when beers weren't necessarily bitter at all, and even the hopping of beer wasn't particularly common at that point. Sometimes they'd use things like wormwood or other sort of bitter spices, dry spices. Anyway, the reason I mentioned the swords of daggers, and I'd mentioned this as tenuous as well, is the loggerheads was occasionally used as a weapon, which of course is where the phrase loggerheads comes from. So yeah, I reckon you're going to struggle to find a more tenuous link between weaponry and port than that.
Well, it's certainly got an interesting approach, doesn't it? Yeah, look, I mean, I'm a collector. I think when you're a collector, collecting's a delete. If you might have, a friend about who would not say, I used to collect swords and daggers and so on and so forth. I think my wife eventually told the number of young children in the house that would probably need to not do that anymore and put my touch across the sort of drinking vessels. But the idea that the sort of military point that you're making, I think is certainly quite strong. If you look at port is very traditional part of port dinners and military stillates today. People will have their loyal toast to the monarch in a wood glass port. That still happens. Fortunately, I mean, here at Ted, we had the warrant for Her Majesty the Queen. We just recently been awarded the warrant to His Majesty King. And it's a part of those sort of traditions and military traditions that enjoy port. Some years ago, we produced a Waterloo port at the 200th anniversary. We thought it was still one-off. We're still making it every year because there are still people who celebrate that particular moment. So, yeah, connection of military and port and where history and all that sort of stuff, it is part of what makes port fun. But maybe I took one of my swords in the fire and I plunged it into my port.
Yeah, I'd be to that. We need to see some punch bowls and loggerheads in the art of drinking, I think. So I'd like to see that in the future.
We had a punch bowl in there that is connected to Jane Austen, actually. So that's and it's quite interesting about sort of punches, and one of the early punches was made port and arak. So arak actually, from Sri Lanka, Ceylon. Where it's made with the sap of the palm tree, and they have what they call toddy tappers, these people who go up and collect all that and they ferment it and distill it. And there was one of the first cocktails made, the first cocktail book made by a guy called Jerry Thomas. Exactly, would be 1880s. 1862, very lot. So, and arak made with a ruby core as one of the early cocktails. So,
yeah, and that kind of predates the use of vermouth in cocktails, which of course became very common with drinks like Manhattans and martinis. And it's interesting to think that there were other fortified wines like sherry and port being used before them. You mentioned Jane Austen. It's a good segue into one of my last questions. So Evelyn Waugh, who wrote Brideshead Revisited, famous quote about port. Port is not for the very young, the vain and the active. It is the comfort of age and the companion of the scholar and the philosopher. Now, Andrew, I reckon you agree with about 50% of that. I know you're a keen outdoorsman, mountaineer, cyclist. You talked about your Land's End to Giant Roads. And I too, I'm a keen outdoorsman as well. So I'm interested, and perhaps this is a nice way to sort of close up how you feel about part of that quote that discriminates against the young and where you feel like the Port category might go over the next 10 to 20 years, how it might attract a younger generation to drink port?
Yeah, look, I think even more, I think, is calling on the fact there that it is sometimes, and we touched on it when we talked about the history and the moment that you could enjoy, reflect, and perhaps it's not something that's to be knocked back at shots. It's something to be given the respect, and that's why it fits into a good moment at the end of the meal. It's typically the end of the meal when people have, you're satiated, you relax. You probably with sort of all the other topics you've been onto the more interesting sort of sex and politics and religion maybe. But people are relaxed. It's, you're putting the world to rights or whatever.
That's the benefit of port, right? And it's a companion to those deeper conversations rather than the kind of, the small talk at the beginning of the meal.
Exactly. Because I think a meal tends to go through this process, isn't it? Where you start a conversation, you sort of knock around a conversation, eventually you land on a topic that gets everyone excited.
So I wonder, port alcohol itself is to the sort of lubrication of those particular conversations.
Well, I think the reason people drink, is because it's social. It helps people relax. I mean, there are plenty of questions around the world about alcohol and its effect on health and so on and so forth. And I think sometimes what's missed from that is the whole debate on mental health, and that it brings people together and allows them to relax and enjoy. Then export. So the quote from Brideshead of people relaxing and enjoying is certainly relevant in that sense. Is it for the young, the active? As somebody who still feels fairly young and still pretty active, like you have to enjoy my glass of port every day. So, I think you can fit into every lifestyle, and I think that, as I said earlier, there's a port style for everybody. There's a port style of choice for every dessert. There is a moment to enjoy it. It's a special drink. It is something with a lot of history, but it's something that's still very, very relevant to the future. And we'll continue to innovate. We'll continue to make these very pipe wines, and I'm sure they'll continue to be enjoyed, across the world as people come together in conviviality, in moments of fun, in moments of celebration, and enjoy a good glass of port. So one of the things I think about port is it's the oil of good conversation. So I'll give you a toast to a fantastic conversation this evening. Thank you very much. Really interesting.
Thank you. Adrian Bridge, everyone. Thanks so much. Cheers.